Hey there. Grace and peace to you. Captain Roger, The Shield Online. Thank you for joining us. You know, if you follow the Jordan River up about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, you'll find three springs of free-flowing water which have been its source since ancient days. Now, in modern times, the most dramatic of these streams pours out of this underground channel just below the mouth of a cave that gapes low and wide from a stone mountain. It's called the Peneus Fork, and its channel changed in the 1800s when an earthquake collapsed part of the cave entrance. For millennia prior to that, the river had come directly from the cave, this shimmering ribbon passing from the hidden depths of the earth to the surface lands where its precious liquid turned a long stretch of desert into a farmland. Since water brings life, it was believed by some of the peoples that inhabited those lands that this stream was a gift from their gods, and they told stories of how it tumbled freely from this underground home where those deities would spend each winter. And in the spring, they said, these great beings, they would come out of the underworld to bring fertility to the land, but only if they could be coaxed out. And so many sacrifices were made and rituals were performed to ensure that these gods were appeased and encouraged to return to the surface. And the people and tribes controlling the region changed hands from time to time, but the altars in the dark cavern remained. Now, when Israel took possession of the promised land, the tribe of Dan ended up there. Like those who had come before them, they never removed the pagan places of worship, even though their God had instructed them to. And the time of the judges came and went, and Israel's cycle of sin and salvation continued, and these shrines to other gods remained too. Early kings, they fought to unite the tribes of Israel into a single nation, and David finished that task, and Solomon, his son, reigned over a united kingdom. But shortly after Solomon's death, the northern tribes of Israel rebelled and separated themselves from the southern tribes. But the temple of God was in Jerusalem in the southern kingdom of Judah. So, being cut off from their center of worship, many of the priests and temple workers, they just moved to Judah, and they left the northerners without spiritual guidance. And the rebel king of Israel responded by creating statues of calves and goats out of gold, and he placed them in various regions for people to worship. But the main place he chose for those idols to reside was that yawning cave in the rock at the Peneus Fork of the Jordan River. The prophet Amos came here to warn the people that this evil would lead to destruction. He preached at them from an overlook as they entered the cave to worship their false gods. But they ignored him, and the Assyrians washed over Israel like a tidal wave, leaving nothing behind but rubble and this cave. Fast forward to the time of Alexander. The Greeks ruled the world, bringing their pantheon of gods with them, and having heard stories of a cave where the underworld met the land of the living, they declared it to be a gateway to Hades, the realm which held souls of the deceased, a place that only the gods could come and go from. And they erected a temple here for Pan, the half-goat, half-human god of fertility and debauchery, and his worshippers would come and perform rituals that involved bestiality and child sacrifice and other acts that we would call horrible and profane. Statues and icons of the satyr were erected here, and a town called Peneus rose to service the needs of the followers of the goat. That was how the river fork received its modern name. Even when the time of the Greeks came to an end, the town remained near that cave, and the dark rituals continued. Romans generally allowed worship practices of the lands they conquered to remain unchanged, so Peneus continued to stand beside that dark, forbidding rock that poured out life-giving water from the angry mouth that was the gateway to the land of death. Now, Rome's greatest ally in this region was a Hasmonean, a man named Herod, and he was given control of this territory along with the title King of the Jews. But he was too busy elsewhere to pay this specific zone any mind. And after this Herod the Great, after he had died, Herod Philip tried to win the favor of Caesar by rebuilding Peneus into a capital city, naming it Caesarea Philippi. The new city had a temple for worshiping the emperor, and the city became a crossroads for trade, and it continued to serve the shrine, which continued to thrive in that cave. The Jews hated this area. It had been part of the promised land once, but now it was ground soaked in the blood of children and goats, contaminated by pagan culture and other impure things. Even speaking of it was discouraged in polite company, and to travel anywhere near the city was to become unclean. To go near those temples, that was worse. It was shameful. But in the first century, a certain rabbi led his disciples to this northern city anyway. In about the third year after he'd begun to travel throughout Israel, leading and teaching disciples who were expected to emulate their master and follow him everywhere he went, Jesus brought his followers here. Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 30 say that Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked them, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Does this seem an odd place to make sure they understood who he was and what his purpose was? Now, Mark, in his gospel, he downplays where they were. He just says they were around Caesarea Philippi. He may have been trying to avoid arguments or shame by being vague. But Matthew is less concerned with such niceties. Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." The word region in this translation, it's an English understatement of the original Greek word, which would be better translated as meaning the portion of the city. So when Jesus came to the portion of the city of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples these questions. Church tradition teaches that Jesus led the 12 apostles, and perhaps a few others with them, to a hillside overlooking the unholy cave in the rock, and then asked them this question. I wonder if he didn't actually bring them right to the mouth, standing at the edge of the water, or maybe even in it, peering into the shadowy depths. If you were the Messiah, seeking to restore the world, doesn't this seem like a fitting place to start? And after Jesus asked who the people think he is, he made it personal. Verses 15 and 16, "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Except this, it's not quite right. I mean, what Simon said is spot on, but he is never actually called Simon Peter in Greek. His name is Simon, and at the very beginning of their association, Jesus gave him a nickname, Petros, the stone. Now, early on, Simon had a reputation. He was headstrong, impulsive. He was prone to fly off the handle. He was more like a fish just tipped out of a net onto the deck, flopping wildly this way and that, than he was like a stone, still, unmoving, waiting to be picked up and thrown at a target. Was Jesus promising him that some desired change was going to come out, or was he gently making fun of him? In their first meeting in John chapter 1, Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Petros. Cephas is a Syriac word. It means rock or stone, just as Petros is a Greek word meaning a stone. Simon, you will be called a stone. That was then. Here, a couple of years later, in pagan lands beside a cave that has been a pagan temple for thousands of years, Simon the Stone has just declared Jesus to be the Jewish Messiah. And in Matthew 16, verses 17 and 18, we hear that Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Petros, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Simon, I tell you that you are Petros, a stone." And that word, it generally meant something small enough to be picked up. It could be moved. You are Petros, and on this, Petra, I will build. Petra is Greek for rock, as in an immovable mass or a solid hillside into which homes could be carved. A hillside like the one they were standing beside, the one with the cave and the other niches carved into it in which the gods were said to live. The one that was steeped in centuries of evil and death, which was called the Gates of Hades. Oh, did I forget to mention that? Gates don't mean as much to us as they used to. In a city in ancient days, the gate was the most important structure. It was the weakest point of the wall, and it was made to open and close, and so the gate was often what invaders would attack as they tried to batter their way in. Gates were also used on cells or paddocks to keep people or animals imprisoned, so they needed to be strong to keep in what would otherwise get out. As the place where people would go in and out, gates became the place for markets to be set up and for elders or other officials to meet. They were the places of authority where rulings were made, judgments were passed, and justice was meted out. Now, this cave was thought to be the entrance to the realm of the dead, called Hades in Greek. And its mouth was a gate which the gods were said to pass in and out of, but from which no human soul could escape. And that's because death was final. No one could return from the underworld. Here's another Greek word to add to your vocabulary today. Gate. It's poule. It's not a word for a common door, but for an opening to a city, a prison, a temple, or something on that order. Poule is a literal physical gateway between places. It is a metaphoric seat of power and authority. But this isn't an either-or definition. It is more of a both and all idea. Jesus has just said he's going to build something that the very authority of death cannot overcome. And with apologies for my leaning so heavily into the original language today, we need to examine what it is that Jesus said he's building. He only uses this word twice in our scriptures, and this is the first place he chose. On this rock, I will build my ecclesia. An ecclesia was a body of free citizens who were called together by a herald. Jesus says he will build, edify, embolden his free people here on this rock, and that the authority of Hades cannot overcome them. Well, how can he say that? Dead is dead, right? Matthew 16, verse 19. This is still Jesus speaking. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. There's two concepts we need to understand to hear what Jesus is saying. The first is that, Jesus never really talked about God's kingdom. That's an English translation of a much larger idea than we can capture in a single word. He is saying that he will give his ecclesia the keys to God's reign or God's authority or the keys to God's infinite realm. It's not just a little walled city. It is everything God rules, controls, owns, has authority over. Now, keys are permission to enter and exit. If someone gives you a key to their house, they are making you welcome to come and go, to use the restroom, to watch TV, or to help yourself to something from the fridge, right? A key to God's realm gives you freedom to access everything. Some people believe there's like a balance of some sort between good and evil in the universe. There's some sort of malevolent force or evil being who is a foil for the power of God. And they struggle, but neither really ever gets dominance over the other. And because of this, somehow the creator of life has no access to the place of death. But if that were true, we wouldn't be talking about a God, would we? We'd just be talking about some limited being. Now, Jesus is saying this isn't true. God's keys open any gateway. And this is something he would demonstrate to be true not long afterward when beaten, scourged, nailed to a cross until he was dead. Jesus simply walked out of the grave, resurrected, whole, because there is no limit to God's reign. Keys are more than just access, though. And the second concept we need to understand is that of binding and loosing. See, there were 613 commands in the law given through Moses. They covered all kinds of situations, but life is messy, and sometimes choosing which ones needed to be applied and which should be ignored was difficult. The rabbis, like the sages before them, each taught their own system of understanding how to follow the law. This was called their yoke, because like the yoke which held oxen together and kept them going in the right direction, the yoke of teaching held the followers of these sages together, working together, pulling in the same direction, right? And the laws that each rabbi said were important to obey or prioritize were said to be binding, while the ones that they taught could be ignored or considered less important were said to be loosed. Jesus said that his ecclesia would be able to declare what was to be bound and what was to be loosed, and God would back them up. That meant they would have the authority to declare how God's law was to be followed. Now, don't take this idea too far. Just as a homeowner giving you a key doesn't mean you can have a party that loots and destroys the house. The keys we are handed free us from the things of the world, but not from the command of the Creator. In essence, it's like we're on a cruise ship together. We can decide which one of the restaurants we're going to eat at and when, but God is still the captain, right? Which brings us back to Jesus and the handful of followers who stood around him at the gates of Hades. On this rock, that very unholy ground of one of the worst places on earth, somewhere their traditions taught them made them unclean just by being near it. On this rock, Jesus said he would build the group of people who responded to his call into a force which could never be overcome by any power or authority of hell. Well, why here? Because he wants them to know the gates of hell don't belong to the enemy. Nothing does. His followers have the keys, so they must set the captives free. And this is the task he has given to those who would be his followers. And there is a thread we can see woven throughout Matthew's narrative, beginning the very day Jesus called Simon and his brother. Matthew 4:19, "Come follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." See, we're not called to passively sit by while people can be saved. We need to watch for opportunities to cast our nets and draw them in. Not long after that, Matthew 5, verses 13 to 16, Jesus said, this is to everyone who is following him. He said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." We, followers of Jesus, we are to season the world and be a light to those who are trapped in darkness. We are to deliver others from darkness so they can taste that full glory of God. And later, when Jesus sent his followers out, Matthew 10, verses 7 and 8, he told them this, "As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give." See, God reigns. This is his world. You have the keys to set people free from the things that chain them. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the unclean, drive out demons. Supernatural demons seeking to taint souls, and earthly ones like addictions, oppressors, and those who use their power or position to rip and tear at others to try to bring them down. Freedom really is free when it comes from the hands of Jesus, and you can use your freedom to offer others theirs. There are other verses, there are other passages which say the same thing in different ways. You are part of the ecclesia, called by Jesus to bring freedom to the world. But we can't do that from inside of a bubble. The modern church, even the Salvation Army, tends to hide in our Christian strongholds. We ignore, avoid, or condemn the outside world from our safe zone of Christian churches, Christian schools, Christian conferences, Christian radio, Christian movies, and Christian books. We're supposed to be the ecclesia, the holders of the keys that grant access to all of God's creation, but we would rather stay isolated, locked away from the world, hiding from the gates of hell, staying far clear so we won't get dirty, so no one will call us unclean for being near them. C.T. Studd, a British evangelist, he once said, some wish to stay within the sound of church or chapel bell. I'd rather run a rescue shop a yard from the gates of hell. Amen. Instead of being separated from the world, we are told to be integrated in it. We are to confront the culture of evil with the truth of Jesus so we can break people free from the power of hell, just as Jesus broke through the power of death and set us free. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15, 55-57, "Oh, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Yeah, because he gave us keys. The gates of hell don't belong to the enemy. They belong to God, and it's our job to free the captives who are held behind them. To bring people in, not to shove people out. These are your battle orders. You are the ecclesia. You have been built here for a purpose. Unlock those gates. Refuse to build walls. Stop living in fear, trapped in the underworld, and start living out love in the fertile lands outside. Follow Jesus out of death and into life, and take everyone you can find with you as you go. If you're with me, let me hear an amen. I'm going to stop right there because I am on the verge of going on. And you know what that can be like. So take this with you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you have nothing to fear. Why? Because God is there. God is everywhere. You cannot get to somewhere God is not already at. Just turn and go with God. Grace and peace to each and every one of you in the coming week. I'll see you next time.